In this video, you will learn how to build an automation that allows you to generate custom newsletter emails with just a few button clicks and publish them. You can have multiple brand settings, each with individual details. You can then generate a newsletter idea, which then generates the idea with a long summary. You can then approve once you like a certain idea, which then generates an image for you, as well as title, TLDR, bullet points, key takeaways. The newsletter is then generated for you. You can then generate the email code out of it, which then generates a nice little image for you. Here's the email, what it's going to look like with the HTML code. You can then create the campaign. Once you're happy with the campaign, you can either schedule it with a scheduled time, or you can send it straight away. This campaign will be set up for you on your Mailchimp account and will appear under campaigns. So there we are. This is the email that was created for us. At this point, you can either decide to send it from here and set a scheduled time, or you can obviously do it from your Airtable frontend. We're going to step by step build out these automations here because they will be required to achieve all of those steps for us. Therefore, we will also need to set up our database as well as the automations and the interface. So let's get started. Let's look over the automation. So we have this interface here with brands. So what are brands? Well, you can have multiple brands potentially if you are, let's say, a marketing like agency, and you have multiple brands that you are supporting, and you could then go ahead and generate all of those brands. So set up a new brand by clicking on this button here. Then you enter the brand name, the logo, email, the language for the brand, about the brand details, and then content guidelines for that brand as well. And then you can have email templates. So you can generate an email template with just this button click, which then will generate a bunch of HTML code, which then will look something like this here. So this is the basis for the emails that we're going to send out later on. And this is going to be specifically, well, adjustable if you want to change the colors, if you, well, if there are some brand colors for that particular brand, for that company that the marketing agency is supporting. So this can be adjusted to their liking, but they can also just generate one if they don't have a template. Then there are services. So any brand can have multiple different services. So for example, one service could be, well, not just services, but also products. One could be a service to do email marketing. Another service could be, for example, Facebook ads, or a service could be something like coding or whatever, right? Or a product could be a book or a course or like phone or whatever, right? All of these things, they are relevant because they allow you to make sure that when you send out an email that you can also add details about the service and basically promote the service. This will become more interesting or relevant later on. And then each brand has a subscribers list. So this subscribers list is specific to this brand. So this other brand here doesn't have that subscribers list. So the subscribers are specifically added to any given brand, as well as the services and templates. You see that here with this other brand that I have here, it doesn't have a template and neither services. And that's something I could set up with just this click button, or the click of a button. So then I can set up services and I can say to which brand those services belong. Okay. So I can give it the name, description, URL, where this service can be booked, or where a call can be booked, or what a product can be bought. Then on this brand data level, we have this generate newsletter idea. So once we click on this button, an automation will be triggered, and the automation will be this one. So content idea generation. This is an automation that basically comes up with an idea that is based on the content of the, well, brand guidelines, as well as the content guidelines, as well as the service that we're trying to offer. So this automation, we're going to go into deeper later on. But for now, you can just click this button. And once you click on this button, a new newsletter idea is created. So down here in this step here, a newsletter idea is created. So you see with this text, the URL where this information came from, a one-liner, and then a summary for whatever the idea is about. And then if you like it, you can approve it. So let's say I like this and I approve it, then another automation is triggered, which actually generates the email. So it generates an image and it generates a title for the email, a TLDR summary, the bullet points of the main points of the email, some key takeaways, and then where basically this newsletter idea came from, the template that will be used. You see this, that this is the template that we had earlier. And we can say whether we want to or want not to add the image to the email. All right. So here you see, this was the idea that was just created. A new image was created for me. So I can then go ahead and say, for example, I don't want to have the image inside of my email, and I can generate the email code. This will then quickly open a new tab, but then after a few seconds, it will generate the email preview here, which then will be an image. All right, so once we have that, we can go in here and we can see that this is the email that was generated. Here, AI automation specialists with the TLDR, the bullet points, and why this matters. Okay, all of this information was generated. Once I'm happy with this email, I can just create the campaign. What this will do is it will open up another tab, which basically starts the automation. Then it gets a campaign ID. This is a new campaign that is generated inside of Mailchimp because that's the mailing provider that I have connected to this automation. Obviously, you could use any other mailing provider that has an API. So then this new campaign is created. So here you see this is the new campaign, and a campaign is basically an email. So you can say who this email should be sent to, so to which audience, then the subject line that you want to have, you can set the send time, and well, the content is what you can see here on the right-hand side. Now you can set a schedule time and send the email directly from here. So you don't even need to go to your Mailchimp, for example. You could set the schedule time and you could schedule the email, or you can just click on send now straight away. This will directly send out the email. However, there's something to consider, and that is that you need a premium account with, for example, Mailchimp for it to give you access to the API so that you can schedule content via the API. Otherwise, if you want to schedule, you have to do it directly in Mailchimp. It's not the worst in the world, but just something to be aware of. However, you can send it directly from here. So if you click on send now, then this email will be sent to all of the recipients. Okay, so let me check if I'm still one of the recipients. Yes, I am. So I should get an email with, with this text where it says AI automation specialists and so forth. Let me show you that email. The sending of the email usually takes a little while because, well, that's something that Mailchimp does. So you see it is sending this email, top workflows to streamline your business efficiency. So this is something that then doesn't have to do with our automation anymore, but it has to do with the speed of Mailchimp. And depending on how quickly it does the sending, I will receive the email, or it will take a little while. Usually it takes a minute or two, maybe a little longer, and then it finally sends out this email. And there we are. So I got the email. It says AI automation specialist, top workflows, TLDR. And then underneath we have this default Mailchimp stuff where I can unsubscribe from the list and all the details. Okay. So I can also unsubscribe directly from here, but that's really pretty much what I got here. So that's the automation in a nutshell. So in order for you to use this system, what I will do is I will share the base with you. So you can just copy this base. I will share the URL with you underneath the video. Then you can also import all of those automations. Let me show you. It's a few. So all of those 7 automations, I believe it is, that will be relevant for this whole solution. Okay, all of these. So one is to generate email templates. One is to adding email list of subscribers in Mailchimp. Another one is to generate content ideas, then actually generate the content, then create the email newsletter preview, and then the campaign on Mailchimp, as well as sending out the email itself. So I'm going to go through all of them one by one, and I will teach you or explain to you everything that is going on. I will also go over the automations that you will find inside of Airtable, because the automations, I believe they are not copied over. Maybe they changed it by now, but the last time I checked, they didn't really change that. So I'm going to view the data and go to automations here. So here are the automations that will be relevant for you. So it is a few. Let's start with generate the email template. And let's also start with this automation. So as always, we start with a webhook. Okay. So I'm using this webhook. this one here. So you will need to set up your own webhook, copy this webhook address, and then go into generate email template. And then when a button is clicked, and here specifically it selects this generate email template. So this comes from the inbox brand detail interface. So you can jump into it by clicking on this button. So it's going to be this particular interface, and there is this generate newsletter, and then there's this generate email template. So if we look back to our automation here, and that's not the one, let me go into interfaces for you directly without modifying the interface. So there's this button, generate email template. So I want to start the automation. So this automation will be triggered when the button is selected. So I can then just say run a script, and that's where you paste in your webhook URL. Okay. So I'm not going to make these changes. I'm going to leave it as I had it. And the script looks something like this. Okay, it's always the same script basically, right? We get the record ID, and then we get the webhook URL, and we have those on the left-hand side as variables. So if you're not sure what's going on here, you should definitely check out the conversation that I had with Jake. So we uploaded it as a webhooks in-depth course, which also explains what's going on in this code right here. Okay, so basically we are using the URL, we're using the record ID, and we're storing it in there. By the way, you will not be able to understand what's going on if you have not finished the AI automation masterclass in the school, right? So I would definitely recommend you finish this before going any further, because it would be too overwhelming. So then once we have this automation, this Airtable automation, this make automation can start running. So once we click on the button, this webhook will be triggered. We generate an email template, which then gets a record from the database. So it gets it from the brand assets. So it gives us if we look at the data here, let me jump to the data. So there is this table called brand assets, and it loads the assets for the specific brand. Okay, because the assets of the brand, they also contain they should contain the details about the email template. So there's this other table called email templates, which contains all of the different email templates. Okay. And then it says which brand these email templates are associated with. So this email template here, this one, is associated with the brand 4. And if we look at brand 4, it's the AI automation specialist brand. Okay. So coming back to the brand assets, it's this one here, this ID 4. You see the same ID here? So they are connected. So basically, if you look at the email template, this is a link to another record. It says 5. So 5 is this HTML code, which then results in this image. Okay? So a lot going on here, but overall, what's happening is basically we are getting at the point that I just showed in the automation. Here, we're just getting the brand of the record in which we clicked on the button. So if I click on the button inside of brands, inside of the AI automation specialist brand, and I click on this button, then it will generate an email template only for this brand, not for the other brands. Okay. And that's why I need to know which brand this button was clicked on. So I get the ID from the button click. I get the record ID. So I look at brand assets at this table. What record ID is it? Then based on that, I am creating a prompt. So I'm chatting with or using OpenAI here to create a completion. And it just says, I want to create an email template for my brand. Here are the brand details. So the brand name, the brand description, as well as the brand email. All of this information comes from this get a record. So from this Airtable. So if we look at an iteration of this automation, we will see that it gives me, so this get a record with the record ID inside of the base that we were looking at, gives me the content guidelines, it gives me the brand email, it gives me the email templates that exists, the about the brand, this is what's interesting for me, and the brand name. Okay, and then the services could also potentially be interesting for me, but for now we are just getting the those three details. We're pasting them into ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT gives us a response. So let me actually put that into a separate tab so it's easier to swap between them. So we are basically using the output of ChatGPT. So here the result. This is what it gave me. And I'm also, I'm only interested in the part that is between this HTML and this HTML text. So this piece here. So in order to only get this part of the output and not this part here and neither this part here, I'm using this text parser, which then uses this pattern in order to only use the text that is in between those dashes, okay? Those back accent aigu or whatever the name is in French. So these back dashes, okay? So coming here, if you look at this, global match, case sensitive, multi-line. Well, it's all set up for you, right? So you don't have to change anything. Only make sure that the result comes from this text. It's then you going through this pattern. I went through this in many videos before. And then we're using this HCTI API. So this is a connection that you will need to set up. So whenever you add this HCTI, I think it's here. So what this allows you to do is it converts HTML or CSS to an image. So that's what we did here. We created an image with HTML, CSS, and it's a very cool tool. And you can just select a connection with them. So just search for HCTI API. So it's this one here. So you can go into the documentation and there you can get an API key. So you log in, it's free, at least to start with, for a few images per month. So 50 per month is free. After that, you will have to pay. Okay. So it's good enough for what we need because you're not supposed to generate hundreds of templates. And then once we're done with this image generation, where we basically just paste in the HTML from this text parser, nothing else, we store the output inside of Airtable. So we create a new record under email templates. So we have this table. Let's jump to the table. We have this template, email templates at the very right. So we create a new entry like so, right? We create a new entry, we give it the name, we give it the data, we give it the preview and not the brand assets, okay? So the brand asset happens, well, the brand assets we do actually as well. So let me show you here. So we get this output, this is the image URL, and we then store all of this information inside of our Airtable. So we get all of those details, the brand assets, the data. So this is what's really interesting, the data here. That's what we want to store inside of our Airtable. So we create a new record for it. So here you see, we set the record, the name, the brand name plus email template. We set the data as value. Then we set the file URL as image URL and the file name as image ID. And as the brand assets, that's where we are assigning the same record ID that we got from this webhook. Okay, this webhook gave us the record ID here, this one, and that's the one that we are storing inside of this Airtable. All right, but you don't need to worry about any of that because it will automatically generate the right brand asset in here. At that point, you will have the automation that generates the email templates, but you don't need to do any of that, right? So you just import, as always, you just import the file that I'm providing to you. So from here, import blueprint, okay? So that's that for this video. Let's keep going with the second part in the next one. All right, now let's look at the content idea generation. So if you look at your assets and you click on this button, then this automation will be triggered. So again, we have the webhook, then we have the automations here. So here we have generate newsletter idea. We say when a button is clicked inside of the brand assets again. So inside of this interface here, once this button is clicked, we are saying run a script, and we're just adding a webhook, the record ID, and it's the same script as always. So the webhook URL needs to be modified with whatever this URL is for you. So here, this webhook URL, and you will need to manually modify this right here. So you will need to paste it in there. Okay. Once you have that, you will see that you will need to connect all of those individual items. So let me go over what's happening. So first we get the brand assets. Then we set a variable. So we want to know the services. Then it goes through all the services that are associated with that brand. So if you look at a given brand, a brand can have multiple services. So in this case, I have the AI workflow automation and I have Slide Hive. So let's say I have these two services. And if you look at the data, you will find that here AI automation specialists at the very right hand, well, has here two services. So what it goes through are these two fields. So that's what this automation does. So it gets me, first of all, the brand assets. Here, it goes through all the services and it gets the services record. Specifically, it gets the service based on the record ID that we get from here. So as you know, there are two record IDs here. So this one has the record ID 1 or like internal ID 1 and this one too. So these are my services, right? So this one has an ID 1, this one has the ID 2. These are not the record IDs, obviously, but it's easier for us to understand. So it goes through one by one in this iterator. And for each of them, it gets the actual service. And for each of them, it just says, I want to set the service as one part of the services. And then it puts all of them together and gives them as an output to get us the newly updated services, which contains all the services. And then we use this OpenAI module where we just go through all of the individual services. And we just say, let me show you. So we have a brand with the following name and description. So we get brand name, brand description, and then we just say what the services are. Generate me random newsletter ideas according to the brand and services. The output should contain only one idea and translate the response to language. Okay, so we also have something on the brand level, which is called language. So here you can select the language. And now obviously if you wanted to have more languages, you could change the language on a brand level. So here you could add more options. So you could edit this field and you could add whatever language you have. So let's say I want to add French in here. I could add French, for example. Okay. And the default option, however, is set to English. And then you can modify that to your liking. Okay. So that is then translated. Then this is then used, the result of this OpenAI prompt is then used inside of our Perplexity research. So go through the above content and search for recently published blogs and articles on this topic. Focus on uncovering unique perspectives, niche sources, or fresh insights that might not appear in top search results. Avoid repeating results from previous searches and prioritize new diverse content. The output must contain only one link. Then the next thing is that we get the citations. So Perplexity replies with citations. Let me show you and the history. So Perplexity gives us two outputs. It gives us the actual output here. So here, this is the content. So this is the text, so to speak. But then it also gives us something called citations, which basically are URLs. So it gives us multiple citations, but we are only interested in one of them. Well, but what we do is we use this to get the citations. So here we get those citations. As the output, what we get is data. So a bunch of data. We then parse this data so that as an output, we only have this here. So it basically cleans up the output. And based on that, it then generates a one-liner. So let me show you the one-liner. So here is what I want. I say as an AI language model, your task is to generate a concise and engaging summary with a maximum of 50 characters. So then I give it some additional details. And this is the developer system role. So there are different levels of roles. Okay, so this is like a developer context that I give it. And then as a user role, I give it the actual text from the text parser. So I take the output from this text parser and I say, take that text as a content and translate that text into the language, whatever the language is, English, German, whatever. All right. And then we use this to create an overview. So this is the overview bot. So what that does is it processes the article, it extracts only the main article text from the provided HTML. It analyzes the article, it writes a summary, and then it formats it. It gives us the output in a certain format where I'm just saying, give me a paragraph 1 in 70 to 80 words, another paragraph 70 to 80 words, a third one also 70 to 80 words. I use the text of the text parser here, and I translate the response into the given language. Something that I didn't properly explain maybe is that what this module does is it actually like just reads the entire page of the citation. And yeah, once we have that, we're storing this information in our Airtable database. So we create a new record where we store the citations, the one-liner, and the summary for a given entry. So inside of the newsletters idea page, let me show you. So it is this one here, newsletter idea page. So this is the URL. Then this is the one-liner. This is the summary. Okay, so here it creates a summary. All right, so that's the idea generation. Now, obviously, you could say, don't go through this amount of output. Don't create the in-depth content automatically. But well, if we already have it, let's just use it. Okay, so that's what we're saying here. So yeah, that's it for part 2. So the content idea generation, and this automation is triggered again whenever we click on this button up here. All right, so let me show you. Run once, and then let me go in here. Let's generate a newsletter idea, and then it goes through this entire automation. There we are. It goes through all services, as we have 2 services. So one service is the helping clients and businesses automate the tasks, called AI Workflow Automation. And the second service is called SlideHive. Okay, so here the slowest part is the perplexity part. Here it then gets the HTML. It parses the HTML, generates a one-liner. Then it goes into generating the content brief, or like brief is the wrong word, but the content summary, right? And then once the content summary is written, all of it is stored inside of Airtable. And there we are. So now it's stored this new idea, AI transforms workflow boosting efficiency. And it is, if we go over here to newsletter ideas, that's the new idea that was generated for us. Okay, so that's it for this automation. See you in the next one. All right, so next we're going to look at this automation right here. So what this does is, again, it's a webhook. So it's the content generation part. So here, whenever we are happy with the summary, we are happy with the one-liner, and we want to create content based on that, we set it to approved, and this then triggers an automation. So it triggers this automation, to be precise. And then, well, first, to be even more precise, it triggers the generate newsletter content generation. So this is started when the newsletter idea page table, when the status is set to approved. So what is this newsletter ideas page? It's this page here. So this is the table. Whenever this status here is set to approved. Now, obviously, we have that in a nicer way here inside of our interface. So once the approved setting is done, you see the content is generated. Here it's done. 18 is generated for us. We can now see this in depth once we jump to newsletter content. And here we are. So the image was generated, as well as the title, a TLDR, bullet points, key takeaways, and then we can generate the email from here, but that's the next step. So let's look at this automation first. So I have this image gen with ChatGPT. I got rid of it because I instead used this part here, which basically just allows me to create a Flux image. So if you don't want to use Flux and you don't want to pay for the Flux API and only want to use the ChatGPT API, obviously you would use this module instead of these 4 here. Okay, but let's go one step at a time. So we have this webhook. So we need to copy this webhook again, and we need to go to our automations inside of this newsletter content generation. And we need to set the webhook to be the one from here. Okay, we copy it, we paste it in here. And as always, the same code here, nothing new. Then we get a record, and we get the newsletter idea page record. Okay, so if we look at this, we get not this record ID, but the actual record ID. I don't think I have a field for that. But yeah, the actual record, we get, let's say, this record here. And what we want to get is this information. So we want to know the one-liner and the summary. So then we create a bullet point based on that. So we have this completion, which generates the bullet points for us. And those will be stored while it's loading. It will be stored in newsletter content. So newsletter content has many fields. One of them is the title, the image, then the TLDR, the bullet points, and the key takeaways. Okay, so all of those are generated here step by step. So the bullet points, here we're just saying, you know what, here is an example, here are some examples. So this is the assistant role that we have. But then the user role, that's where we are adding the summary again. This is coming from this part here. So here, this summary, we take all of this summary, this whole content here. We take this summary and we also translate the responses into the right language, okay, into German, for example, or whatever the language is. Then we do the same thing with the key takeaways. So here we also have the settings and we have the prompt. This is really slow. So here we have developer system settings, your helpful analytics system, use a maximum of 50 words. We're basically saying how it should look like. We're giving some examples. And as a user, we give the summary, the results, and then we just say create, translate it into the right language. We should do the same thing with TLDR. We do the same thing with the title, and then we generate an image prompt based on all of this information. Okay, so we're just saying, you know what, we're just generating the TLDR, the bullet points, the key takeaways. We have the summary lookup. This is just a lookup field. This is not an extra field in here. We also look up the URL. And then we are here again having developer role with some details. And as the actual user content, we just give the result and we translate the response to the language. So the result of 7, which means the result of this one here, which created the bullet points. And based on those bullet points, we create an image prompt. And then I use this math module just to get a random seed for the image generation. So when you're using Flux, the Flux API, you can add a seed. And if you always use the same seed, you will always generate the same image. But if you change the seed for the given prompt, then you will get a different image. So that's why I just say, okay, you know what, a number between 0 and 42, just use that. Then I do the Flux API call. So I'm using this URL. And if you want to use Flux, you go to Flux API. So Black Forest Lab, these are the guys that created the Flux API, or you can just go to the API details. So register here for BFL, and there you can create an API key and all of the good stuff. And once you have that, you can set it up in here. So you set the URL. You can change the URL if you want to use Flux fast or schnell. Then you would have to change this endpoint. So here, API reference. So here, that you can read through the details. So I would not recommend doing that if you're not aware of any of the coding stuff. So here you see there are a few endpoints. I'm using the Ultra endpoint. Now, if you want to do faster, you could do any of the other endpoints like the dev variant, the fine tune, the pro. There are even more. So if you feel like it, go into dev. I'm not going to do that in this video. I did create an API explanation video where I explain all of these things. You can check it out. It's also in the course material. So then once you have your API key, then you need to set the JSON, and you see I'm just using the result of this gen prompt and the seed of this math prompt. Now here a few things can go wrong if the prompt contains an empty space or an empty row or empty line, or it contains any special characters. This prompt can break. So that's something to be aware of. Then I'm using this sleep module because I just wanted to sleep for 15 seconds. In the meantime, the image usually is generated. And then once the image is generated, then I can request my image. And the ID for the image I get from this module here. Here, this gives me an output with an ID. So the data, this is the ID that I need to add at this point here, at the end, after this URL here, in order to actually get the image. And once that is done, I can store the image or the URL inside of Airtable. So I'm just saying I'm storing everything in Airtable. The title, the image with the URL and the name, then the TLDR details, the bullet points, the key takeaways, the record ID of the newsletter idea, as well as the brand assets record ID. So I store all of these things, which ends up being stored inside of this database here. So where we have the bullet points, the key takeaways, the image, which is this one here. So I'm storing all of this inside of our Airtable database. All right, and again, if you didn't want to use the Flux API, you would get rid of these and you would just plug in this image gen here in between, and you take the output from it and store it in Airtable. So ChatGPT can generate images for you as well. They just will look a lot worse because it's using DALL-E 3, which isn't a great model. So yeah, that's that for this automation. So now let's look at the newsletter automation for the creating the newsletter email preview. So if you look at our automation here, we can generate an email code here. So this is the button. Once we click on that, well, one hook is opened, but then it will create an email preview based on our email content. So here we can decide whether we want to include the image that was generated, whether we want to exclude it. So we can just say yes, no. Then once we click on the button, then an email preview attachment will be generated. So this image right here, where you can see this is the email that was generated based on our template as well as the image. So now let's look at how this automation works. So what this does is it actually directly calls the hook. So which hook does it call? Well, it calls this hook right here, this webhook. So this time it's not a classical button like the ones that we saw before in our automations, like the one that we got here on brand data level, for example. There are two buttons. So this one is a button and this one is also a button. But what we have here, this here, is not really a button. So let's check it out. We can edit this page and you will see that this is just the source where you can click on this edit field. So in data, you will find that it just uses this URL, which is the one from here. So this webhook. So you can copy that from here and you can go in here. You can click on this generate email code. Well, it will call the hook. So generate email code, and it will then call this URL that you add here. Okay. And we pass the record ID along as well. So just so you know, this is also a way how you can trigger something. So the difference is that this will open a new window and will just call the URL with a new window. And the other button that you saw, this one here, for example, doesn't do that. So it's just a more elegant way, so to speak, but what we see here is easier to implement. So there we are, we get a record. So what record do we want to get? We want to get the newsletter content because we need it in order to generate the idea. Then we get, or the image, so to speak. Then we need to know what the template is, because we are basically combining the content with the template in order to then create the image. And then we're using this router. So if we're saying exclude image, then we just go this route. And we're saying include image, we go this route. So here we're just creating code based on those two content pieces. So based on the content of the actual email and the template, we are basically putting those two together. So we're just giving a developer prompt here, and we're just saying, okay, this is what we want to have. We want to have the title, the image URL, the TLDR, the bullet points, the key takeaways, the URL, and we want to translate all of that into a language. So once we have all of that, then with the output from this module, we are creating the image. So we're taking the result, and the result will be HTML code. So let's look at the history here to see this in action, because that's what we did, right? So we here got, from here, we got the result, which is HTML code, a bunch of HTML output. And we take this HTML output, we generate an image from it with this module, and it gives us the URL where this image is. And then we are just storing the image inside of our record. So inside of the record ID, inside of the newsletter content, we are only updating the image and the email code. So this is the email code, this is the file URL, as well as the image. So if we look at the table called newsletter content, that's where it basically fills up this email preview image, as well as this email code. So this is the HTML code, which then leads to this image output. And then if we exclude the image, so here we have the option to say include image, exclude image. So I'm just going to say done here. If we include image, we want the image to be at the top. If we exclude image, the prompt is just a tiny bit different. Here, when generating the HTML, we're just not considering the image itself. The rest of the prompt is pretty much the same. It then generates an image based on the HTML code, and it updates the Airtable code. So yeah, that's pretty much what this automation does for us. So pretty cool stuff, I'd say, but that's it for this video. The next thing is actually pretty simple. So once we are happy with the HTML, the image, and all of that, we can click on Create Campaign. And what this will do is it will just set up a new campaign for this particular email inside of Mailchimp. So if you go to campaigns, it will then create a new campaign for us. And it happens pretty instantly. So yeah, it just calls this webhook, which then calls this automation, right? So again, a webhook, we just instantly call it from here, right? So if you look at modifying this again, so edit pages, there you will see that this is again the same thing as we had here with generate email code. This here, generate campaign, is just calling this webhook. So I call it again. So yeah, basically it's you can edit this field and you will see it's the same thing. Here we have this URL, which is the same as this URL here. So you see here it says D2LXE and here D2LXE. So it's the same URL with the record ID, and then it just triggers this automation right here, which then gets the record from the database with the newsletter content. So everything that we want to actually send, which if we look at it is this part here. So we get the newsletter content, and what is it that we want to send? So then what we want here is we want the from email address, the title, the subject title, the from name. Then we set the fill the body content. This is the important part, by HTML format text. And then we just paste the email code, which is actual HTML code. So this is quite important because basically it is is it newsletter code? Yeah, it should be here. Yeah, this code here. This email code, this entire thing, that's what we are sending to Mailchimp to then generate this campaign for us. So this one right here, for example. So then we can use that and we update the record, just telling that we get a campaign ID from this Mailchimp, right? So this will retrieve or give us a ID, quite important, this ID, because we need to know what campaign this is for. So you can click here and you will see that one of the outputs is the campaign ID. So we are storing this campaign ID inside of Airtable, inside of our newsletter content record ID. There we are, campaign ID. We set that up because we want the campaign ID. Where is it? This one. We want the campaign ID to be there because otherwise it's not linked. So our automation isn't linked to the campaign in here. So each of those campaigns has its own ID, and we're basically storing that ID inside of Airtable. Yep, and that's pretty much it for this automation. So let's look at wait a second. I think we didn't have any one here. No, the next one that will be relevant is going to be the one to send newsletter emails, which we'll be doing in the next video. So the last thing that we do is to actually send the campaign. So there is another automation that we built. So this will either send it based on the scheduled time that you set up, or it will send it directly. So there are two options, scheduled or send now. And this will trigger, so selecting one of those will trigger the automation in here, which what it says, when a record matches condition. So when the record is either sent now or scheduled, then the script is ran, and the script just uses this webhook URL and runs the default code that we always use. It's the URL from here, from part 6, where we're sending the email via Mailchimp. So we're either sending it now or we're sending it scheduled. So first we get the newsletter content ID from which this came. So here this newsletter has a content ID. So here it's 18, for example, but it has a record ID that is going to be cryptic. But basically we need to know which email we want to send out. So this email has now a campaign ID, and the campaign ID is what will be relevant for Mailchimp to know which email to send out. So what we're saying is, get me the record ID for this specific email that you want to send out. And then in here, That's where we are getting the campaign ID from this Airtable, and we are sending the campaign. So you see there are multiple different options. We're sending the campaign. That is when the send type is set to send now. What is the send type? Well, the send type is this field right here. So we set it to send now, then it will go this route. So this one here, and otherwise we will go this route if it's scheduled. But if it's scheduled, we will need to know also for which scheduled time we want to schedule this campaign. So the action is scheduled time, and the scheduled time is the scheduled time that we also get from this record. Where is that from? It is from here. So we have this field called scheduled time, and here we can select a time and then say when this should be scheduled. There is an important aspect to consider, however. This only works if you have a paid account with Mailchimp. So this is an API thing that they only allow you to do if they actually, if you're actually a paying customer. Otherwise, this won't work. All right. So that's how this automation works. And with that, we conclude the entire automation. So now you have this entire flow here with a pretty nice user interface where you can generate content ideas. You can generate the content out of those ideas. You can create a preview. You can create templates for emails, and you can generate campaigns directly in Mailchimp. Now, obviously, you could use other tools as well. I just use Mailchimp because it's a very widely spread tool for creating or sending out emails to mailing lists. Okay, so that's it for this campaign and this automation. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one.